happy Wednesday, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us here on the Transportation and Logistics podcast, powered by Atlanta Dispatch and Humblebee Enterprises. I am very excited to be here with a special guest. We have Joe Freed, founding partner of Freed Goldberg LLC. And before we begin, I just want to give a big old shout out to the Atlanta Black Chambers. Today, I had an opportunity to join them as they hosted the logistics event. We were able to hear from DHL, from the CEO of Be Rooted, which is a very, very awesome product that is in Target, as well as the shipping concierge in Express. Some different perspectives on what's going on in the industry and how there are different services that you wouldn't normally know about and how they're interrelated. So shout out to the Atlanta Black Chambers and of course Tawana for inviting me to those events. Also, the Dispatcher's Guide to the Galaxy is available now. I'm very, very excited to have been able to publish that bad boy right before 2022 closed out. So you can get it in an ebook or a physical book, just wherever you would prefer. So thank you so much for all the support that I've been getting there. And here it's our topic. It's a different type of topic, but I'm very excited to be here. Joe, how are you doing today, brother?
I'm doing great. It sounds like you've been a busy guy.
Yes, sir. And I didn't mention this, but on top of that, I'm on diaper duty. I'm a new dad,
God
and
bless you, buddy. That's amazing. Life has
yes, sir.
changed forever.
100%. I couldn't agree with you more. It definitely has. I'm not as agile as I used to be.
You think you had logistics problems before? You're getting ready to learn. You're gonna get
Yes,
taught.
sir. Yes, sir. I agree. Do you have any little ones?
I have four. They're not so little. My youngest is 17, and we're just about to get him off to college, and so we're going to be facing a different side of life, which is going into that empty nester time.
Yes, sir. Well, congratulations to you. I'm sure that you've seen some beautiful things having four little ones grow up to be not so little anymore.
And challenges, but God's good.
Yes, sir. All the time. Well, yes, sir. Look, I know I want to get into the topic, but when I was perusing your LinkedIn, I saw something that was very interesting, which is the 1,000 days of biking, 1,000 straight days of biking. What was that? How did that come to be? It's a huge accomplishment. So congratulations. But what inspired it?
Well, thanks. It's today is day 1190, which is crazy for me to think about.
What?
But I like to say that before that 1190, it was a whole lot more days of me not being on a bike, which is what led me to have to be on a bike. So the quick version of what inspired me, without taking too much time, is that I had gotten to a point where I was terribly out of shape. I have a cardiac condition. I let it not only affect my heart but my state of mind, mess with me bad. And for a number of years, I just became very sedentary. And then increasingly, I kept hearing this kind of voice saying, "You want to live or you don't want to live? Which is going
Mm-hmm.
to be?" And if you're going to live, you're going to have to take some steps. And so I decided. I read a book called Atomic Habits, which is
Oh,
a great
really?
great book. I highly encourage people to read it. It's the opposite of what I thought it would be, which atomic sounds like huge. Really, atomic is like minuscule, like at an atom level, making little changes that add up. And for me, my decision was that I'm going to really say every day from now on, um, I'm going to get 30 minutes of exercise in, cardio type exercise in. And, what I've learned is that it's persistence that makes everything change. Little step, that old adage, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm just taking one bite at a time. And I don't really think about how many days it's been, except when I start to feel discouraged and I say, I'm just going to miss this one day. And I go, man, I'll never get back up to 1,100 days if I miss one day. So that's what keeps me going sometimes. But it's literally one little step at a time. And it's not a question of whether I feel like it or not. And please don't mistake it. Some people say, well, you must really love the Peloton. No, 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 no. I tell people it's a complicated relationship, me and the Peloton, and really none of it's love. I mean, it's more a tolerance thing. But that's so that's yeah, that's it's been going on now for a long time, and it's hard for me to believe. But it's what the book says is that eventually, if you stop treating something like a goal, then what happens is you stop being somebody with a goal. You just start being somebody who rides the bike every day for 30 minutes. And I guess that's where I am right now. It's not really a goal anymore. It's a non-negotiable in my life.
I love it. I love it. And would you believe it that that is the book my wife has been raving about all year. It's on my countertop right now. James Clear, Atomic Habits. She really enjoyed the book. She's told all her friends about it. It's my time to read next. And I'm excited about it because in certain ways I embody some of those same traits, just I don't know what it is about me, but the same way that you had that goal of, maybe I should do something that's going to make my life a little bit easier health wise. I kind of had that same situation sometime last year. Going to the gym was really what I came up with. And would you believe it? Your boy has been 5 days a week, every single week since I don't know, maybe the last 10 months, and it's
That's
been
amazing.
yeah, it's been
It's
because
awesome.
of that. It's just understanding that some things should. It's easy to make something a non-negotiable, even if you're not feeling like it. If you just accept it, accept that it's a part of your life, and move with it.
I totally agree. In some ways, as crazy as it sounds, it's easier to make that decision and stick with it than having a choice every day of whether I'm
Yes,
going to go
sir.
ride a bike or not. So,
Yes, sir.
congratulations to you on that. Please keep it up. You got a lot to live for. and
Thank you,
and
brother.
and it's more than just living. It's living healthy and setting great examples for your new little one. I don't know if you have others, but you have a lot of people who follow you, and so I believe that that's our real mission in life, is to be models of appropriate behavior. So bless you for doing that, and may it inspire many others.
Yes, sir. Same to you. Well, question before we move on. 1,000 days, that's a very long time, brother. That is a very long time. And this is a logistics podcast. So the logistics around you being able to do that for 1,000 straight days, with you living life, probably having to travel and all these things, describe some of those obstacles that you had to face in keeping that streak alive.
Well, you're right. I mean, like last year alone, last calendar year, I did 107 presentations to groups around the country. So I'm on the road a lot. In fact, I'm on the road almost constantly. Every week, I'm somewhere, and so I'm very blessed that I have people around me who when I first started talking about this, they didn't really believe that it was real because I had had some false starts before. Can I get an amen on that? you know um but when I said, no, no, this is real, I'm not going somewhere unless and until you have helped me create a plan for how I'm going to ride, and I want it to be Peloton if I can, because that's what kind of keeps my metrics for me. But if it can't be a Peloton, I just need a stationary bike and Wi-Fi, because I can I'll give myself that ability if I need to. And so now part of my assistant who schedules my travel, her job is to, if you look at any trip that I have planned, it says where the bike is, what time it's available, and whether I need to do anything to get there. Like if I have to take a Uber to get there, I know that, so I'm planning my day accordingly. And I try to stay places like I know which hotel chains have Pelotons. So I try to stay there first if I can. And if I can't, then I just, it's a plan. But there's also, I'm not saying it's all external because some of it's internal. If I'm getting on a plane if I'm getting on a plane at 8 o'clock in the morning, there are some days, yes, I get up even that much earlier and I get the damn ride in the morning, so that I can so that I don't have to worry about it later in the day when I know it's going to be busy and hard to get it done. So what it requires for me is making it non-negotiable, and and I'm so blessed to have other people who help me. And I've had some things try to screw up, just like you do when you make all the best plans in the world through logistics. Sometimes the world gets in the way, right? And so because it's a priority, um, I'm somewhere. I mean, I remember one time I drove almost an hour from this little podunk town I was at because when I got to the gym that they promised my secretary had a bike, it didn't have a bike, and I had to find a place that was open on a holiday weekend, a little gym somewhere. I literally drove almost an hour in each direction just to ride a damn bike for 40 minutes. But I did it, and
Yes, sir.
I was actually really good to do. You know,
Yes, sir.
I've
That's
learned I've learned a ton. I've learned a ton from this. A lot more than the health pieces. I've learned a lot from it.
Yes, sir. Well, look, I'm very grateful to have you here on the stage to share that story. And like I said, that was very inspiring. So when I saw it, that's definitely the type of stuff we like to highlight so that people can be inspired, be encouraged, no matter where they are in their journey. It starts one day at a time, one bite at a time, as you alluded to with how to eat an elephant. So thank you for sharing that. And for you, how did you get your start in law? We got a nice topic, but I like to build the background on the people that we're talking to. So, how did you get your start in law?
Well, I was as Eddie Murphy said, I wasn't always a cop. No, I'm just kidding. But I was actually a police officer for about 6 years here in the Metro Atlanta area. Went off, and during that time, I worked lots of wrecks. That's where I spent most of my time, is out on the road doing that kind of police work. Um, I was a um, I was a physics major undergrad, so I kind of understand a little bit about how things like that happen and what happens and dynamics of things like that. So I was always interested in that kind of stuff. And then, I sat around in a courtroom. The longer I sat around in the courtroom, I started thinking, you know, important stuff happens here. And law, I mean, and the justice system, whether it's the civil justice system or the criminal justice system, is far from blind. Who your lawyer is makes a difference. And I saw it over and over and over again. And whether you want to say it should be that way or it shouldn't be that way, I mean, I got feelings about that too, and you probably do too, and each of your listeners probably do. But it is the reality we live in. And so, I've always been somebody who's wanted to leave this place better than I found it. And I had a judge about that time kind of pull me into his chambers and say, "Man, I think you should do something more than what you're doing." And he pushed me toward law school, and I decided to go. And that's how it kind of all started. And then I got out, and I didn't go directly into the transportation side. I actually worked in medical cases for a while, medical negligence cases. I was always interested in those systemic things. Like I tried to, I've always thought for a long time that a lot of our systems in our country, they push down to the guy who can least afford it a bunch of responsibility. And trucking, of course, is no exception to that rule. Um, but it also happens in hospitals, and it happens in many industries where the power is unequal. And so that's always been interesting. I know I've already gotten off your topic, but that's how I got into law, and that's why I got into law, because I felt like this is a place that I could make the most difference um, as a human for other humans.
Okay, yeah, and look, don't worry about the topic, in the sense of that, because at the end of the day, I do want people to be able to connect, with you as a human. That's the best way to connect with anybody, that human to human experience. So it's all good. This, no worries, it is all good, brother. But we see personal injury attorneys everywhere these days. Advertising on the billboards, on buses. You're in Atlanta, you see the buses, the radio stations, and definitely on regular TV. And in Atlanta alone, we have what's that brother's name? We have Reginald Green, the super lawyer. I actually went to, his son is a junior. He's my fraternity brother. So there's two of them doing the super lawyer. We have Josh Palmer. He's the big win lawyer. We have, and everybody and their mama knows, Ken Nugent's one call, that's all. So the personal injury attorney, and that craze, like, what is a personal injury attorney, coming live and direct from an attorney, and why do you think there's such an emphasis in this area of practice these days?
Well, I don't know. I wish I'd have gone into the billboard business or the wrapping buses business, because that would have been a better entrepreneurship move than any of these other ones. But there's a frenzy around it because I think that as a general rule, you have two kind of classes of lawyers, if you will, if you want to think about it that way. Ones that are trying to market direct to the consumer. Just like, I mean, think about this from a business perspective, because I know you have a lot of entrepreneurs who listen to you. I mean, think of the B2C kind of a approach where in order for me to get clients, I got to go to individuals. They don't know who I am. Why would they ever know my name unless they saw it, right? So it's a branding concept that you're reacting to, and you picked Nugent. He'd be very happy that you picked him. Made his day if he listens to you. But John Morgan's pissed off because he wanted you to say Morgan and Morgan and size matters. Um, you know, and all these others who are out there, they say, "Why didn't you pick me, man? Damn it, I got to try harder." But I've got friends in the marketing side of law. Oh, to finish my thought before, then there's other lawyers. So a lot of those lawyers are in the business of attracting business. That's what they want. They want as many cases as they can get their hands on, and they're going to try to make whatever they can on those cases. And it's not a personal process. It's very much a mill kind of an approach to the practice. It's I get the case in the and I push from there, and I'm gonna push volume, and I may not know your name at the end of the lawsuit or the end of the claim, but I'm going to have gotten you some money, and hopefully you're going to be reasonably happy with the outcome. Then you have lawyers who you'll never see on billboards. You'll never see me on a billboard or my firm. You'll never see us on a bus. You'll never see us on a park bench. Our marketing that we do is more what I would call B2B. So we're out there marketing to those lawyers, the ones you mentioned. A lot of them have been or currently are lawyers who refer cases to us. And so we tend to work on a much smaller volume of cases that tend to be more serious, and we put a lot of personal effort into those cases. So think about it as the difference between digging lots of little holes versus digging fewer, deeper holes, and that's the way it works. And what the world currently believes, and it seems to bear itself out, is while all those, a lot of those marketing campaigns to me are pretty tasteless, but they work, and they're getting cases in the door. And the idea of quick cash, quick things. I mean, for the same reason that any human being might be attracted to that, they're attracted to that here, and that's what's going on.
Okay. Well, cool. So, what is the actual practice personal injury? Because I have a, I have a, I have a small little stint in big law. Not too much. It was in, let's just say, it's a previous life now that I'm in logistics. But at one point in my life, I was working for a top 40 globally ranked law firm doing, AFA, so alternative fee arrangements, and coming up with the strategic pricing to make sure everybody felt like they won in the deal.
Yep.
So I saw all the corporate matters. What's your
Yeah. So
definition
so
of
so
personal injury?
personal injury is really a broad field that covers anytime somebody gets personally hurt or killed as the result of the negligence of either another person or another entity or a combination of those things. And so then the question becomes in those cases is, are those people, are those defendants legally responsible for the injury or the death? And if so, to what end? What's going to be the measure of damages? That's the practice as a whole. And then the practice as a whole has become much more specialized, um, like the practice of medicine. If you ask somebody, well, tell me what the practice of medicine is, they would tell you all kinds of stuff. But now there's all kinds of minutia in terms of specialization, and that's what's happening in law now. More and more people. So, for instance, my practice is pretty much 100% commercial transportation cases now, although every now and then I get pulled into something else. Other lawyers are more broad. They'll cover everything from a dog bite to an elevator crashing down, to an escalator failing, to somebody getting um, raped in a parking lot. I mean, that's it's a broad field, so it covers your typical things people think of all the time, like car wrecks or truck wrecks. It also covers anything, any kind of a situation where somebody gets hurt or killed, and the allegation is that's because of somebody else's negligence.
Gotcha, gotcha, gotcha. Yeah, I mean, I think you are very well known for your expertise in major truck crashes. These days, Joe, they might even say that you might be the best. As a matter of fact, I'm on LinkedIn right now, and there is a brother by the name of Ernest Warren Jr. who left a comment yesterday that says you are the best ever. You know what I mean? So you're definitely well known in this field. Now, question: why the emphasis on this area of personal injury versus any other? The major crashes. Would you say that major truck crashes are like the golden goose, if you will?
Well, they're looked at that now, but it's interesting. When I got into this field, it was not even understood as a field. Um, I came out of a time I spent about a decade working against Ford Motor Company to try to get them to correct a problem with their fuel system on the Mustang and on the Crown Victoria. So it was like, think of the old, way old Pinto case, but it was happening with Mustangs and Crown Victoria. So they would get hit from behind and they would catch fire. And so I spent 10 years of my life doing nothing but trying to get Ford to change the design. And I was doing that one case at a time, right? And ultimately, Ford called me and said, okay, we're changing the design. I knew that because I had gotten thrown out of the Detroit Auto Show the week before for crawling under the new Mustang.
Nah.
Um, and and uh, and I was escorted to the exit. They were nice about it, but long and short of it is they came, they resolved all my cases with me, and I woke up and I didn't have any cases. I had done okay financially at that point, but I didn't have any cases, and so I knew for me that that it was important for me to be not only a good lawyer, but I had to be a subject matter expert in whatever I undertook. Like when I did medical cases, I didn't do all medical cases. I did birth trauma cases. When people don't have the joyful outcome that you've recently had, but some other outcome,
Yeah.
and then they have a lifetime of issues. So but I wasn't really a med mal lawyer, medical malpractice lawyer. I was a birth trauma lawyer. I wasn't really a product liability lawyer. I was a post collision fire lawyer. And when it came to so it was really, but in those fields, like even now, it's been decades since I've done a birth trauma case, but I could still tell you all the standards. I can close my eyes and I can read the textbooks because I know that area so well. If you talk about fuel system containment in cars, I know that doesn't sound like a very sexy topic, but if you wanted me to, you name the car, I'll draw you the fuel containment system for that car even now, years and years later, because I'm a subject matter expert in that. So I knew that I needed to be for myself. And it's probably, I mean, if I really am going to be vulnerable with your listenership, I'll tell you it's my own fears of not being enough. And the
Mm.
way the way I've dealt with that is by overcompensating, by saying, you know what, I may not be the best at very much, but I'm gonna be the best at this little area, and nobody's gonna outknow this stuff. And so I struggled around for about a year trying to figure out what I was going to do after product liability. And for a couple of weeks leading up to a particular day, everything I turned to was a truck wreck. I mean, I'd get on the news, there'd be a truck wreck. I'd get on the road, there'd be a truck wreck. I even got on an airplane and someone left a Transportation Topics magazine open to a safety related issue in the seat pocket in front of me. And I was like, all right, Lord, I mean, I
Yeah.
think you're telling me something. And so a few weeks after that, I was tossing and turning in bed about 3 o'clock in the morning, and I was asking myself what I was going to be when I grew up. And I said, I think I'm supposed to do truck crash cases. And they said, well, and I said, well, what's different about truck crash cases than medical malpractice cases or those kinds of product cases is it's a lot easier to get other lawyers to send me those other kinds of cases. I thought, people won't understand that these cases you really need to know a lot in order to handle. So they just handle them right now as if they're big car wreck cases. And And I said, well, I don't really need that many of these cases. And I think it's what I'm supposed to do. So I literally got up that morning full of energy for the first time in a while. I went into the office and I was in the process of writing emails and letters to take myself off of a number of boards that I had gotten put on for the product world in law,
Mm-hmm.
product safety. And the phone rings. It's literally 8:15 in the morning. My private line rings. I pick up the phone. It's a lady. She sounds kind of far away. I said, how can I help you? And she said, well, this morning my husband was killed. And I said, I'm so sorry. How can I help you? And she said, well, he was on the side of the road and a truck hit him. And of course, I don't know if that's the case or not, but I said to her, because I was amazed, I said to her, how did you know to call me?
Mm-hmm.
And she said, I don't really know. Somebody gave me your number and your name. And I said, well, let's get together and talk. Let me investigate it for you. Okay, because the takeaway from that is when I made my decision, I had 0 truck crash cases when I made the decision that that's where I wanted to go. And from there, it became my mission to really learn as much as I could about truck driving and this industry, which is so unique and has so many parts and pieces to it. And that's what been my life has been now for approaching 20 years now. I mean, I've been pushing in this area, and there are very few people out there who have spent the ridiculous amounts of time. I mean, I went to truck driving school. I train drivers how to drive. I mean, I've done, I mean, uh, and so when I'm working against quote the industry, I'm really not. I'm working in favor of safety. And so it's a very, very long answer to how I got to where I am and why, but it's a huge part of who I am because I know one thing for sure, Jory, and it sounds like you and I are alike in this sense. I know I'm doing exactly what I was placed on this earth to do. I know this is my ministry. This is my way of living my life in the way that I think I'm intended to, which gives you a whole different level of, um, I don't know, confidence, feelings, um, but that's my truth to my
Yes, sir.
core.
Okay. Well, look, I appreciate that. And I want to come back to some of that later on, the teaching piece, because that's huge, in my mind, especially with this being your practice. But, it did drop in my spirit the fact that sounds like, we align in other places too. So one of the messages I got this weekend on Sunday from Pastor Mike Todd was talking about, just the disciples of Jesus and how before they were disciples, they had an area of mastery. They were very skilled in a specific area, and they were able to utilize those once they actually became, uh, you know, disciples as well. If they had to lean back on it, and he was basically just saying that in order to do what you need to do in this world, you got to master something first. You got to become a master craftsman, or in your case, a subject matter expert. In 2 sections now, not just the way that a car tank, a gas tank sits in a car, but now trucking in the way that that whole process should be going safety wise. So that did drop in my spirit. If you guys want to go check that brother out, Pastor Mike Todd, he has some crazy sessions.
Well,
That
I'm gonna definitely check that out. I love that message because I think it also speaks to is that part of our job is to recognize that which where we are and what do we have, and stop always looking for something else. And I hate to say, I don't know, I'm not saying it very well, but every one of your listeners right now is special in their very own way. Every one of them has had life experiences, many of which have probably been painful. All of that pain, all of that pain didn't happen for nothing.
right,
I mean, so I think that it's just super important to take that concept and say, okay, so it's almost like the concept of, your ministry is where you are and who you are in whatever moment you are, right? I mean, So use that subject matter expertise as a way, as a path into living a life of service.
Yes, sir. That's exactly the message that Mike Todd had, brother.
I love
So
that message. I'm going to go check it out.
yes, sir. Well, look, are we able to talk numbers here?
Whatever you, I told you before we started, no subjects off limits to me.
Okay, cool. So your organization, you are a founding partner in Freed Goldberg LLC. How many trucking companies have you guys gone up against to date?
I don't know the answer to that.
Roundabout.
Because we're not a huge volume firm. Remember, I mean, we probably have a couple of hundred cases going at any given time between the 9 lawyers and the firm. Um, and we've been at this for uh, in this configuration for a little over a decade and a little bit, a few years. So some of those are repeat customers probably.
Yeah.
Um, but we're not, me personally, I mean, I don't know. I know we've recovered, I think a little bit over $1 billion at this point. So that number, for some reason, I keep that one in my head.
No.
Um, but I'm also, remember, I'm also, my organization, really, I'm a co-founder of something called the Academy of Truck Accident Attorneys, which has 1,200 lawyers, and my mission there is to be a teacher, where I communicate with, teach, and consult with, and have with probably most of those lawyers over my career. Sometimes for money, and sometimes I'm just helping them, because I believe that if you believe my message, where what the reason I'm doing this is to improve the industry and to improve safety, then a long time ago I realized that there's only so much one guy, Joe Freed, can do, or even my firm can do. So if I really, really believe this, then what I need to do is I need to start to create an army of people who know how to do this and do it appropriately. Because what I started saying before is, back 15, 20 years ago, you didn't ever see a billboard that had for trucking. You didn't ever see a billboard for or a bus wrapped for trucking, because at that time the world treated these cases as if they were just big car wreck cases. And one of the big things that had to happen, and that has happened, largely under my tutelage and the help of other people along the way. I'm not trying to overstate my involvement, but is that the plaintiff's bar, this personal injury bar, now understands that trucking cases are not the same as car crash cases, that driving a truck is not the same as driving a car, and that they understand a little bit more about this logistics world that you're involved in. They understand and have studied um, brokerage situations and shipper situations and all of these sometimes highly technical arrangements that exist between various companies in the transportation cycle. And they've taken those things apart to see what parts they can live with and what parts they can't. And so anyway, I'm rambling, but it's a different world today than it was back then.
Yes,
Very,
sir.
very, very different than it was.
Okay. Well, look, I mean, you're mentioning so many things that I do want to unpack, but I'm gonna continue this line of question. I feel like a lawyer. This line of questioning right now, and then I'll come back to the other part. But you
I'm gonna plead the
mentioned.
fifth. I'm gonna plead the fifth. No, no, go ahead. I'm not trying to run away from any of the numbers. I mean, we've sued a lot of trucking companies, many of which people have heard of. Some of the top 50 and the top 100, and then many of which who are owner operator type, leased on type folks, or people running under their own authority, who are mom and pop operations, who we've been involved in suits against brokers and shippers, and there's all kinds of interesting conglomerations going on. I mean, look at what's happening in Amazon. Look at what's happening with JB Hunt in the way they're running now. Lots of interesting things, but we've been involved one way or another, either directly, but by
Oh,
being
what do you mean with the JB Hunt? If you could give me a little bit more on that one.
Well, I'm just saying that a lot. I mean, I think I mean, I'm just learning more about JB Hunt. In fact, I'm in litigation now about it. I mean, all that. I mean, I'm studying what their system is. There's a lot. You know, I personally think they're trying to put something together that's similar to what Amazon's doing in terms of how, in terms of the way they're brokering loads. And so I may be wrong, by the way, so I'll put a big giant star around this that I'm not professing to know for sure, but some things really make it look like that. I mean, when I see, you know, when I see a mom and pop, you know, meaning a one truck motor carrier pulling a JB Hunt trailer, I ask myself why. How is that happening? Why?
Oh, yeah.
And you can already start to spin your educated mind around the most likely answer to it, and it has to do with money. That's why. And the question then becomes, how did that load originate? And you know, is that load was JB Hunt initially? Did they accept that load as a motor carrier? Did they accept that load as a broker? I mean, how did it all come about? Which is the same thing that's happening with Amazon. When you see an Amazon trailer, says Prime, big, huge, beautiful trailer, being pulled by something that doesn't look like a big, beautiful, brand new tractor, ask yourself why. It has to do with money. And so for me, my training is follow the money. So I don't know exactly what's going on yet, but I suspect that it's going to be, well, I just think it's going to be a very interesting investigation into how that's working. And my bet is, you know, if you go and you talk to small motor carriers who are pulling for JB Hunt, um, you know, I bet you're going to find they're using an app. They're going through a process just like that seems like a brokerage process, but they're doing it as sort of a closed system, which is the same thing that Amazon's doing.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, that is the case. I'm still getting emailed. I own a dispatch company, and one of my customers is a small fleet owner, about 8 trucks, power only, and they are. I am getting those emails from JB Hunt about doing their. Uh, they have a specific name for their power only program, but it is one of those closed system situations. You got to be pot committed too. They don't want you half stepping. So
Nope, that's the whole point. And so it's going to be interesting to see. I mean, I'm like I said, I probably shouldn't even be talking about them too early in the process, but I know the people at JB Hunt very well, and on their regular side, the regular side of their transportation business, I've got a lot of respect for what they're doing. I'm concerned about what I'm seeing on this other side, and I'm going to investigate it. I'm not saying they're bad. I don't want anybody to be yelling at me after they hear this and say, well, you know, you're running off at your mouth. I probably shouldn't be saying this, but I've told them this. I'm concerned about what I'm seeing, and I'm going to
yeah.
study it. I'm going to study it to see, and then this is my teaser. So Jory will invite me back at some other time, and we'll be able to talk about JB Hunt at that point.
Right, right. So look, you mentioned you have collected over a billion, $1 billion for your clients, and that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money to be pulling in, and not to uh, ever disrespect or to think about the actual people involved, the families involved in these. The money can never do probably what was going on before the accidents happened. So I don't want to make light of, oh yeah, this is just a huge amount of money and people are living it up. No, a lot of stuff happened as a result to actually get this. So I did want to put that out there. But from your experience, just give me a roundabout number. What's an average verdict? You know what I mean? Like, it's $1 billion. A lot of cases. What's the average amount that you guys get settled?
I don't know that there is an average amount because I've done work in 43 states now. So I'm all over the place, and not all, not all. I mean, one of the things that sometimes people forget when we live in what's supposed to be the United States, each state's tort system is quite different. And on top of so how that comes into play is what you're allowed to ask for in a case is totally different from state to state. I'll give you a quick example just so people will understand.
Okay.
In Georgia, on a wrongful death case, you ask a jury to give an award of damages for the value of the life of the person who died viewed through that person's eyes, through the eyes of the decedent. So, what do they value their life at? What would they value their life at? By contrast, if you go one state over to Alabama, you don't ask that question at all. It's more punitive, where you're saying, what's an appropriate amount to punish the defense for causing the loss of this life? Okay, so those are two wildly different systems.
Yes, sir.
And so how you would approach those cases is totally different. The systems are very different with regard to how they deal with allocation of fault. There are some states where if you're 1% responsible for your own injury, you get to collect nothing, that you're barred. There are other states where you could be 99% responsible and you'll still collect 1% from whoever the jury says is 1% responsible. So it's wildly different. And because of that, the ranges of what may happen are wildly different. And I don't have enough data points, and I've not studied the data enough to say here's an average. But but I will tell you this: statistically, the numbers have gone up considerably over the last decade, and the numbers have gone up since COVID.
Gotcha, gotcha. We did have a question come in from one of the listeners say, all right, so what's the average for a wrongful death in Georgia or South Carolina?
Yeah,
Let's keep it with Georgia.
yeah. Well, actually, I mean, I have a lot of experience in both Georgia and South Carolina, and I don't know that there is an average because, again, look, think, and I don't mean to give you the typical lawyer "it depends" answer.
That's what I'm hearing.
No, but so I think it also depends very much on the lawyer you have, and I also think that it depends somewhat on the liability. It's not in the abstract. I mean, if people get jurors are human beings. If jurors get pissed off, they award bigger numbers. So in Georgia, for instance, I mean, it's in any place. I mean, if the jury thinks somebody's a quote good person, they're going to award a different number than if they don't think they're a good person. If they
That's
have
true.
a wife and two kids, then they're going to and two young kids that have to be provided for. They're going to award very different numbers than if somebody's 80 years old, they've lived a full life, and they don't have anybody um, to to um, to provide for them. So you'd have to drill down to get a fair answer to that. You'd have to drill down and say what are the circumstances more. What I can tell you is that typically wrongful death cases in Georgia and South Carolina get resolved in the millions of dollars. If there's liability, if liability's clear, and not clear necessarily, but if there's good liability in the case, and then it will go up significantly based on those kind of factors, like um, was there pain and suffering before the death? Who are these survivors who are left? How did this person spend their life during the time that they were here? Sort of how much was left for them to do? Um, who did they leave back in terms of who needs to be supported? Um, are there any special circumstances regarding that? Like if did they have a special needs child who has special needs and responsibilities? Um, all of those kind of things factor in. We've resolved wrongful death cases in both Georgia and South Carolina for anything from depending on the circumstances, in the low millions to in the well into the eight figures. So I don't know. I'm
Right,
trying to
right.
be as
No
straight
worries.
as I can with the answer, but it really needs to be drilled down more
Yeah.
uh, to answer it.
Okay, yeah, no worries. I see. Me going to your website, and you guys have a good amount of your numbers showing. The highest award that I saw was 52 mil, right? 52 mil. Very, very tragic situation. Again, deepest condolences to the families and everybody involved. But I saw the highest number, of course, sticks out was about $52 million. which is a lot. That's
And
a
I'll
lot.
just tell you that's the highest one we can put on our website.
Okay. You see?
There may be others.
Okay, okay. So I saw 52 and 52 mil. That's a lot of money. That's eight figures. And the reason why I was even getting down this line is because the FMCSA only requires a commercial carrier to get $750,000 of automobile liability insurance to activate their motor carrier authority. And the majority of brokerages, they only require $1 million for that same motor carrier to be able to haul their freight. So, with those being the numbers that are the industry standards at this point, where is this money coming from to pay these settlements if that's all the motor carrier has? Like, where you guys getting that money from?
Well, that's a great question, and the answer is we can take it in a couple of parts. The first part is while those are minimum numbers, what businesses have to be concerned about is what do their asset picture look like, right? I mean, if you're if you're big huge trucking, I mean, you're U.S. Express. You're not going to run around with $1 million in insurance because if I go hit you for 100 million, you're going to have to pay it, right? So you've got exposure. So on the risk side of this analysis, different carriers see their risk differently, right? And the same is true for if I go hit C.H. Robinson in a case, I can go collect out of C.H. Robinson's pocket if I need to. And there are lots of cases that I've been involved in where motor carriers have had to pay out of their pocket for money for things, um, in order to get the case resolved. And so sometimes I've even put them on payment plans, 10-year payment plan. They paid for a long time. Um, so I do think there's a giant disconnect. I mean, look, the whole reason brokers get sued is because motor carriers don't have enough coverage. If motor carriers always had enough coverage, brokers would never be sued. Because why would you go up the line? Why would you ever sue a shipper? You wouldn't, because you're going to go to the direct negligence on the driver or the motor carrier, and you're going to stay there. So the whole reason we're in this, I mean, when you talk about, I know I'm going beyond the answer I'm going beyond your question, but I think it's super important to take into consideration. If you look at the whole picture, I mean, obviously, I'm getting the money from somewhere. A lot of times, I'm getting the number from companies who have much, much, much more coverage than the minimums. And why would they buy that coverage? Because they know that their assets are exposed. Some of them try to play games by putting their assets in one company and their drivers in another company. Those kind of arrangements oftentimes fail because we're able to show that they're kind of sort of straw things to try to protect against liability. So that doesn't really work. So most responsible companies operate with much more coverage than the minimums.
Gotcha. Look, in the last, let's just say, decade, there's been a rise of independent dispatch agencies. That's what I was saying. I own. I own Atlanta Dispatch, and one of the biggest things that has been going around the industry, at least for the last 2 years, is where is the liability in what a dispatcher does? If something goes wrong, if there's some adverse situation and it might have been due to what the dispatcher booked or something of that nature. In your experience, have you ever? Is there any other party that you ever included into the into the case outside of the carrier, the broker, the shipper, and the insurance provider? Have you ever had to include a dispatcher?
I've never included an independent dispatcher, and I think that the primary reason why is because it's sort of an interesting situation. The FMCSRs, as you know, put ultimate responsibility for dispatch on the motor carrier, and it's a non-delegable duty that they have in their dispatch obligations. So even if you screw up, the motor carrier who's assigned to that load still has responsibility for that screw up. Whether they may not at first want to believe that, but by the time the lawsuit's over, they're going to know that that's true. So the next question then becomes, what have you done to contractually address that with them? Okay, but under any circumstances in that situation, I'm going to be able to go after the motor carrier. Now that doesn't mean if the motor carrier has 750 in coverage and I have an injury that's worth $10 million and you've got coverage, it doesn't mean I won't go after you if I can establish your liability. Now, how can I do that? Remember, in law, it's all about supposed to be. We can argue about whether it works this way or not, but what's supposed to be is all about reasonableness, right? So what would be considered reasonable conduct for a dispatch operation? And the first question of that to me would be, what is reasonable for all of us out there in the world to believe is appropriate for somebody who's dispatching even within a company? What is a reasonable dispatcher do? And if you get outside of what is considered or should be considered reasonable, that's where a jury is supposed to come back and say, you weren't reasonable, I find against you. Okay. So I don't know if I've answered your question except in the broadest level. So we'd have to get into specifics about, if you tell me, you dispatched a driver who was out of service. Well, then the question becomes, how were you supposed to know that dispatcher, that driver was out of service? What information are you given? And that's why, I think I mentioned earlier, I'm always interested in the systemic issue, because a lot of times you get some driver out there on the road and they get in a wreck and everybody just makes the snap decision, bad driver, right? And they fail to look at the system in which that driver is operating, where a lot of times, I mean, unfortunately, some motor carriers, and I'm certainly not saying all of them because there's some phenomenally great ones, but some of them are out there really pushing these men and women in a way that's inhumane. And so at the end of the day, the question for you, and it would apply to you as a dispatch operation, to a logistics company generally, I have sued logistics companies, to everybody who may be involved in this, even down to, I just got done with a case, against a manufacturer. One of the parties involved was the manufacturer of the automatic emergency braking system that didn't brake the truck before the crash.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody, the question is always in all these cases is what constitutes reasonable care on behalf of whoever's being pointed at.
Gotcha. No, you definitely answered the question. And it makes perfect sense. It definitely makes perfect sense. And
Hey,
you
Jory, let me stop you one sec. Let me put a little bit finer point on one thing
go for it.
on the dispatch side. So what I would be looking for very specifically is, what have you undertaken to do? What have you told the motor carrier or the broker, whoever you're working for, whoever your contract is, what have you contracted to perform? Okay. And then I'm going to look at those duties and responsibilities and saying, are you following reasonable reasonable protocols with respect to what you've undertaken to do? And I'm going to look also for some kind of indicia of you exercising a lot of control over the driver in a way that makes you sound a whole lot more like a motor carrier than an independent dispatch operation. And the more I can establish that kind of control, the more likely it is that I'm going to be able to hold you responsible, because now you're not only dispatching logistically, but now you're controlling the operation in terms of the transportation. And that's how brokers get in trouble too. You look at their contracts, it sounds a whole lot more than brokering. You're now, all all the communications happening through the broker's telling you what routes to take, the broker's telling you what time to pick it up, what time to drop it off. They're telling you to wear a certain shirt when you're dropping it off. They're telling you wear a different hat when you're picking it up. They're telling you all kinds of stuff. That's control, and under the law, that's going to get you held responsible.
Gotcha. All right. Yeah. That does make it a lot more specific. And I appreciate you, Clarence, giving me that fine tuning right there, especially with that last piece with the brokerage, the brokers being very, very, I would say, in control of the shipping, the receiving, and a lot of other points in between there. Back in the day, brokers used to get away with that type of stuff a lot more. Now, carriers are more likely to report brokerages for, requiring impossible things or things that just aren't legally possible. So I do like that direction that we're heading, where we're not just, or motor carriers are not just doing it just because they're afraid to damage the relationship with the broker, or they feel as though they're going to be blackballed and not be able to run for that broker anymore.
Yeah.
Because you got to be legal, safety first. I mean, that's how we started this conversation. And as a dispatcher, that's exactly how I run my operation. It's always going to be safety. It's going to be safety first every single time, because this is somebody's life. This is a whole family, and maybe the provider for that family. So it's always going to be safety first. So
And Jory,
just
look, that's that you're hitting on the main thing. It should be safety first. That's what the world's going to expect of you. The hard part is life gets in the way sometimes, and you have people who want to push you because they need an exception. Hey, man, you're my best guy. I count on you. Don't let me down. I got to get this load here to here. Yeah, blah 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 blah. Whatever. And they start to play those kind of things. You got to have the gumption at that point to stand up and say that's not safe. And if you don't do that, and there's a crash and somebody gets killed, you're gonna pay a price for it. And from my perspective, unapologetically, I say you should. Other people may disagree with that, but that's my position in the world. If you take the shortcut and then the inevitable happens, then I'm sorry. You knew what you should have done. You didn't do it. Now you got to pay the piper. And I know some people probably don't necessarily agree with that, but that's where I am.
Gotcha. No, I hear you, brother. I definitely hear you. Safety is very important. All right, so two, I have a couple more questions just to button this bad boy up for you, and the way that you take on these major trucking crashes. Is it predominantly on a contingency basis? That's a very popular
Yeah,
fee arrangement. Is that what you guys do?
every one of them is contingency.
Okay, gotcha. So you guys doing all the work, the leg work up front, and if they get paid, you get paid.
That's right. And usually, since you keep in mind what I told you, most of my cases are cases where some of those lawyers you talked about earlier are calling me behind the scenes, right? And so you've hired them because you've seen their marketing, you've seen a TV commercial, whatever. Um, and then they look at the case and say, wow, this one has huge potential, but this is going to take a lot more work and a lot more specialty work than we really have the capability to do. So they will call me and say, will you take on this case? And I'll look at it. And if I decide to get involved in the case, then we share that contingency fee. And so it ends up being a fee split. Um, and so almost every one of my cases is a case where I've been brought in by another lawyer around the country as a specialist in this very unique area in order to bring value to the case, and and we then split the fees.
Gotcha. I mean, you've been practicing in this field for quite some time now. You are definitely considered a subject matter expert, and in your professional experience and your professional opinion, is there ever an amount that's too much, like the quintessential nuclear verdict, something like, maybe you guys put an additional zero on that? Like, do you ever feel it's too much?
I do. My brothers and sisters who are plaintiff lawyers would probably hate me for saying it, But my answer is yes. I do think there's. I think that it's. Yeah, I think that there are times when it's out of hand, but I think that the times right now that you hear about that are out of hand are really the exceptions. And a lot of times people don't realize that those big, huge numbers, by the time they're actually paid and they go through an appellate process and they go through, you know, sort of post, what I'll call post trial scenarios, they very rarely end up at those numbers. Um, but there are times, I mean, you hear about some people have a verdict of $1 billion or a verdict of $500 million. Most of those scenarios, even when they happen, they're anomalies. And when they happen, that's don't think for a minute that somebody turned around and wrote a check for that right away. I mean, there's going to be a lot of post trial maneuvering in those cases that bring those numbers way back down. But I do think that it can get out of hand. I'm skeptical about putting a cap on things that becomes arbitrary, and I still trust the system that we have. It's not perfect, but it's a system that involves before you get to trial, you have judges who are supposed to be looking at things and trying to keep things fair in terms of what gets to trial and what issues get there and which ones get thrown out before you ever get to trial. And then you have a group of human beings who get together and look at something. They're not going to be perfect. They're not subject matter experts, but it's an adversarial system, and there's two sides, and it gets presented, and they make a decision. And then after that decision is made, then you still have the court back there who watched the whole trial and who gets to make modifications himself or herself to a verdict. And then if the parties can't live with that, then there's all the appellate processes that happen. And it's far from perfect, but it works much more times than it doesn't. And it ends up working out people tend to focus on the times when it doesn't work and it feels like it's unfavor against the defendant. There are plenty of times, unfortunately, it doesn't work when it's unfair to the plaintiff. Also, when just because somebody didn't like the color of somebody's skin, the choices that somebody's made in their life, in terms of a profession or a spouse or a job or even mistakes that they've made in their life, when they get cut short, I mean they get cut when they shouldn't be cut. So it's not 100% blind. Like I said at the beginning, justice is not blind in our country. Nobody needs to go all that far to see that, to see proof of that. But it's not always in one direction. And I would hate to see the system get thrown out because of the exceptions of when it didn't work, without recognition of all the wonderful times when it does work.
Gotcha, gotcha. We had a question come in from a longtime listener, and actually, we have two questions. One is, I'm a small fleet owner that was involved in an accident caused by another party in need of legal representation. Do you take on these types of cases?
I don't, I don't, but if you'll get them my name, I'll give them names privately of people who I would hire if I was a small fleet person, and be happy to give them advice as just a human being in this line of work and
Gotcha.
direct them.
So I would definitely tell you, brother L Express. I don't know how to say your company name. Sorry about that. But I would say definitely reach out.
Yeah,
You
if
can
you
go
reach
to.
out, just you reach out to me. My email address is just Joe at Fried Fried Goldberg Goldberg.com. Um, and I'll be happy to jump on a call with you and tell you, depends on where you are, what part of the country, and sort of what the circumstances are, so I can give you then very specific. Um, because remember, there's an old adage that says, a good lawyer knows the law, a great lawyer knows the judge.
Yeah, I've heard that.
You
I've
know,
definitely
so
heard that.
so where it's all going down is important.
Yes, sir. Okay. And last question is from another person. And the question is, I wanted to ask the question, if his firm has litigated a good number of cases where families need help because their loved one was a professional driver who died due to the negligent or deliberate acts of their employer. So have you ever been part of those type of
We
cases?
have we've handled at one point somebody did some statistics for me. I don't think it's this number anymore, but at one point about 20% of the cases I handled, I was representing a commercial driver or their family in cases where they were severely injured or killed. And the last part of your question is important though. If it's because of um, if it's because of negligence or even deliberate things by their own employer, there's all kinds of restrictions from state to state because of something called the workers' comp bar. So if they get hurt or killed, they may get stuck in a system that's the workers' comp system, which is part of the civil justice system, but it's not based on negligence. In those cases, in many circumstances, you can't sue your employer. You're stuck within that system. But lots of times we're involved in cases where there's either an equipment failure, where we have the ability to go after some external person that's not the employer, like a like a repair company or something like that, or even more commonly, it's just a truck on truck wreck, which happens a lot, as you might imagine. I'm working on one right now where I'm not going to get into the details, but I'm one of my cases right now is that the case I mentioned earlier that involved a failure of the automatic emergency braking system.
Yeah.
That case also involved a commercial motor vehicle that on a long straightaway in a work zone was coming up on another commercial motor vehicle that had a brake problem, and the driver had pulled over for a second because he thought his brake problem was because a tarp may have come loose and gotten stuck in something. So he pulled over for just a second in a place, long straightaway. And this trucker's, I mean, you can see it on the video. He's got 20 something seconds coming up, and he just doesn't appreciate that the vehicle's there, and the guy ends up getting very badly hurt, amputations and things like that. Um, so that's a case where we looked beyond just most lawyers would have just looked at that driver and said, it's the driver's fault 100%. He was distracted driver, whatever, which is true to some degree. But we don't stop there. We want to understand systemically why something like that would happen. Is there an issue with training? Is there an issue with hours of service? Is there an issue where you have a motor carrier who's pushing somebody beyond what's appropriate? Just, I mean, there's a lot of men and women out there who live in what I believe is modern indentured servitude in the trucking industry. They were sold the idea of the American dream, owning their own business by having a truck, and somebody tells them how they're going to help them get that truck, and we're just going to have this little loan right here. And man, as soon as they sign that dotted line, they're servants. They're slaves to a system that they have a hard time making any real money getting out and getting out of. So anyway, I didn't mean to get on my preaching in the answer to the question, but yeah, we do a lot of cases, and we also direct a lot of drivers when they have issues. And sometimes the drivers, what I'll call is technical legal term, full of you know what. I think you probably see that as a dispatcher every now and then, right? So I don't want to come across saying that every driver is the truth teller and every motor carrier is the bad guy. You have to look at every situation case by case, and you have to lay any biases apart and really look at it factually and make an educated decision on how to proceed.
Right, right. Well, look, you mentioned earlier about the ministry in, what you specialize in and becoming a subject matter expert. And you talked about this briefly earlier, the ATAA. What's that? What's that? Talk about that just a bit. What is that?
Yeah, so the ATAA is a nonprofit that I started about 8 years ago. Now it was started by me and another lawyer who specializes in trucking cases named Michael Leeserman, and we formed it in order to create a platform where lawyers who really wanted to learn how to handle truck cases in the best way possible could come and learn. and a platform where lawyers who are working in this area could share information readily with each other, so that we could advance the skill set, if you will, the knowledge and skill set, and how these cases were handled. Um, and it's been successful. I mean, we have over 1,200 members now. Everybody who I know of who handles truck crash cases as any regular part of their business is in that organization. So we share a lot of information on appropriate ways to handle cases. We also share a lot of information about motor carriers and about litigation strategies. And what's beautiful about it from my perspective is it's grown into an organization of people who really care about um, trying to leave this place a little safer than we found it. You know, like one of my tenants in cases that I've now taught to these people is, I think you need to look for non-monetary terms before you resolve a case. So it shouldn't only be about money. It should be about leaving the world better, right? So if God forbid, Jory, you and I were on the other side of a case, and I identified something that I thought was unsafe in your operation, before we ever talked about money, I would be talking to your lawyers about, is Jory willing to change that? Is he willing to change his policy about that? Is he willing to change his practice about that? Because if I can go back to my people who have suffered a big loss, and I can say, look, we've already done something to make sure that this happens less in the future, right? Then I can talk those people into resolving their case for a whole lot less money than if Jory says, "Oh hell no, I'm not changing anything. I didn't do a damn thing wrong," and blah 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 blah. Now my people think their person's dead and nobody's even making a change. So that's what I mean by trying to change the architecture of this. So we do a lot. I just came back from 3.5 days of teaching. We call it a boot camp, where there were 100 younger lawyers who are newer at this. Um, and I'm super proud of that organization. In many ways, I think it will be my legacy. And through the process, I'm trying to teach people how to do things, and I'm also trying to teach them how to do it appropriately, if you know what I mean. Just be a human being. You don't have to be an asshole to be an effective lawyer. In fact, you're a lot better lawyer if you're not an asshole. You shouldn't come at people from a holier than thou place. Every truck driver I depose, I'm mindful when I sit across from that truck driver that, but for some little tiny thing in history, I could be on the other side of that table and he could be where I'm sitting. I'm not a perfect driver. It's by the grace of God I'm not responsible for somebody not having some tragedy out on the road. I don't come at any case from a place of being holier than anybody, because I'm not holier than anybody. And you talk about the ministry. That's what I mean by that. And I sit with families all the time they've just had the worst thing that can possibly happen in their existence happen. They've just lost somebody or worse. And there are things I think that are worse. And I get to sit there with them and cry with them and 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 try to help them put their pieces back together. And so only part of it is the part that we've talked about. There's that whole other part where, how do I show up in those people's life in a way that's right? But notice I said it both ways. How do I show up for that truck driver who's sitting across from me who's responsible for 3 dead people? Do I just need to be an asshole lawyer and beat the crap out of him? What good does that do? Okay. How about if I show humanity to him and or her and say, I've struggled to even figure out how to talk to you. We got to talk through this. What's it like for you? How are you doing? Are you okay? And to make sure that they understand that I don't think they're a bad human being just because this matter happened, because I don't. Um, I've met some people who I think are pretty bad people, but there's probably some people out there who think I'm a pretty bad person too. So who am I to judge? I don't know. I'm pontificating, Jory. I didn't mean to, but I hope. I mean, that's the lesson I'm trying to teach my profession, is that you don't need to show up as an asshole. That's a technical legal term also.
I believe you.
You know, but you don't have to show up that way. And that's not the way. I mean, if you believe the way I believe, and there's a book that teaches me how I'm supposed to live my life, and that's what I believe in. And I don't want to get into spirituality here, but I think that that's the way I'm supposed to be. And so I think that it's my job now that I've had a measure of success in my field to try to bring that to my field first, so that maybe some things can start to change about this system where everybody just seems like they want to hate each other at every point when it's just not necessary.
Yes, sir. Well, thank you for your share there. And to close out, because that was huge. I appreciate you going into that. A lot of that stuff I don't even know how I'd be able to handle, brother. So that's why I'm gonna leave that for you, the professional, because you know it's really that can get really really hard. That can get really hard. Um, but you mentioned something
Hey,
earlier.
Jory,
Yes, sir.
I got the best lead counsel in the world
Oh,
upstairs, upstairs, upstairs.
yes, sir. I hear you. I hear you there. I mean, when you leave it in God's hand, it can you can make it through some things that you never thought you could. He'll definitely show you a way.
Hey, man, I just got to remember to get the hell out of the way sometimes.
Yes, sir. We all do. Um, and this is the close. Basically, this right here is the close. You mentioned this earlier. I like this phrase, working in favor of safety. That's what you do, so much so that you went to truck driving school to make sure that you knew what was required and what was the formal education behind the situation. I was going to ask a question, but that kind of answers it clearly. I was going to say, how do you ever fraternize with other trucking companies and come up with ways in which we can prevent these accidents and all these type of mishaps before they happen? But it seems like that is something that you do.
I'm spending probably about a third of my professional life in that role now, where I don't do any of that for compensation. I'm not a consultant that people pay, but I have gone in and helped trucking companies. If you come to me and say I want to do it better, I'll take my own time and my own dime, and I'll help figure it out. I mean, I've helped companies come up with driver manuals. I've helped them. I've talked them through, what I think are good safety programs that they can that from a training perspective. I answer questions all the time by motor carriers, by insurers in this space. I think I spoke to 3 different insurance conglomerations last year that are trying to build proper underwriting um, um, criteria, which I think should all be based on safety. Um, so I'm spending a lot of time on that. I'm spending a little bit of that time I'm spending in DC trying to affect things at the policy level. But that's a pretty frustrating process, to be honest with you.
No, I can believe it. I can believe that. Final remarks. Any advice for commercial carriers listening, or maybe those who are even thinking about entering the market as a commercial carrier? Any final advice
Well,
that
and
you?
I'll even broaden it to beyond that to people who want to be in the logistics world or they want to build businesses like you've built. This is awesome industry, and there's really good money to be made at it, and you can make that really good money and not forget that safety is a big part of your world. And I really believe this, and I don't think this is just because of my perspective. From what I've seen, safety is good business, and leading with the concept of safety will make people want to work with you more. It will keep the tragedies from happening, not every time, but if God forbid they happen, you want to be sitting across from someone like me, and you want to be able to say, I'm horrified that this tragedy occurred, but I can't wait to tell you the lengths to which my company goes to be safe. If you can do that with a straight face, you don't need to worry about the litigation because you don't need to worry about the nuclear verdict. Because what nuclear verdicts come from is people getting pissed because that's not true. That's what they're getting pissed about. That's why they react the way they react. So that's my final comment is safety is good business. And whenever there's the temptation to cut safety or not pay attention to safety, fight like hell, because the universe is going to come teach you a more expensive lesson than you're getting ready to try to save yourself.
Great advice. Great advice. Well, brother, I truly appreciate you for your time this evening. Everybody listening in, if you didn't know if this was billable hours, our bill is probably $2,000.
No, no, no bills. And Jory, I feel like I've made a new friend. So if I can ever help you or your listeners out, you just let me know, and I'm happy to do that.
Oh, I appreciate that, brother. I truly do. But again, you didn't have to join me here, but being able to hear your side of the coin, like I said, we discuss motor carriers and their side all the time because that's what this platform is for. But I definitely am very grateful to have been able to hear
Hey,
from
you
you.
better look for me to be a listener now, man. I'm be paying attention.
All right, well, perfect, perfect.
And I'm always anxious to get my eyes open wider and wider and learn. So I will learn from your people, just like hopefully I've been able to provide something that's a little different.
Yes, sir. Well, look, next week you should join us. Next week, the guest is going to be Desmond Clark. Desmond Clark is a former NFL player. He is a tight end for the Chicago Bears, played in the Super Bowl. But this brother has now opened his own freight brokerage, Bear Down Logistics. So we're going to be talking with him next week about, his growth, the things that he's faced in the industry. He's been operating now for maybe 10 or so months, but he's doing pretty well. Can't lie to you. I think he has a natural. He's just pretty good at this so far. So yeah, I would say definitely join us next week and listen in to hear from that brother. And always on Monday mornings, 7:30 a.m., we're going to be partnering up with Freightway Sonar Team. This week, we're going to be welcoming Linkage Logistics to talk about all of their high volume opportunities so that you, the motor carrier, the trucking company, can position yourself to take advantage of those bad boys. So that's it. Joe, thank you, sir. You have a
Thank you,
blessed.
Jory. Appreciate it. You guys all take care. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, bye.